The man who had everything except the truth. The soft hum of classical music drifted through the exclusive Manhattan restaurant, mingling with the clink of crystal glasses and the hushed conversations of the city's elite. A grand chandelier loomed above, casting golden light across the polished mahogany tables and pristine white tablecloths. At a corner table, positioned to offer both privacy and the best view of the skyline, sat Ethan Harrington. Impeccably dressed in a tailored navy blue suit, he cut into his medium-rare filet mignon with precision. The red wine in his glass swirled slightly as he lifted it, catching the ambient light like liquid rubies. Ethan Harrington was a man who thrived on control. A self-made billionaire in the real estate industry, he had built an empire brick by brick, without apologies, without regrets. He was known for his ruthless business acumen, his ability to turn failing properties into gold mines, and most of all, his unwavering focus. Emotions were for the weak. His life was a carefully constructed fortress. Every moment planned, every relationship calculated. He had no need for unnecessary attachments, a private driver, a luxury penthouse, an assistant who managed to schedule down to the minute. Efficiency was his love language. And then, in the middle of his perfectly orchestrated evening, his world tilted on its axis. Two small figures materialized beside his table, standing just within the warm glow of the chandelier. He barely noticed them at first, engrossed in the rhythm of his routine. But as the silence stretched, as the weight of their gaze bore into him, Ethan finally looked up. Two girls, identical. Both wore matching navy blue coats over white blouses and pleated skirts, their long, dark hair cascading in loose waves over their shoulders. Their faces, small, delicate, but with a quiet intensity, made something cold twist in his stomach. Their wide eyes, a startling shade of deep green, mirrored his own. Something about them sent a chill skittering down his spine. "Can I help you?" His voice carried the same clipped efficiency he used in boardrooms, refined yet impersonal. One of them took a step forward, her small hands clenched into fists. She held her chin high, her voice firm, unwavering. "My name is Sophie, and this is my sister, Claire." A pause. Then, with a gravity that did not belong in the voice of a child, she added, "We're your daughters." Ethan froze. The restaurant faded into the background, the murmured conversations dissolving into static. His grip on his wine glass tightened, knuckles whitening. For a split second, he considered the possibility that this was some sort of misunderstanding, maybe even a cruel joke. But then he truly looked at them, at their faces, at their eyes. His eyes. No, this wasn't possible. His mind struggled for logic, searching for an answer that fit his world. A scam, a coincidence, but deep down, in the part of him that he kept locked away, he already knew the truth. The problem wasn't whether they were lying. The problem was that they weren't. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice stiff, controlled. "I think you must be mistaken." A small sound, a quiet scoff, made him shift his gaze to the woman stepping out from the shadows just behind the girls. Hannah Carter. His breath hitched. She was different from how he remembered. Gone was the soft-spoken woman who had once smiled at him with warmth and admiration. This Hannah carried herself with the steel resolve of someone who had been forged in fire. Her navy trench coat hung loosely over her shoulders, but the stiffness in her posture betrayed her emotions. Her lips pressed into a thin line, her blue eyes sharp, cutting. Without a word, she reached into her bag and pulled out an envelope. Aged, slightly crumpled. She dropped it onto the white tablecloth beside his untouched meal. "You might want to read this," she said, her voice cool and measured, but with an edge that made his stomach knot. Ethan didn't move. He simply stared at the envelope, as if it contained something far more dangerous than ink and paper. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Hannah exhaled softly. "I tried, Ethan," she said, her voice quieter now. "For years, I tried to reach you. I left messages, sent letters. But I was shy out. Every single time. His pulse roared in his ears. Lies. It had to be lies. If she had reached out, he would have known. He would have. He would have done something. He tore open the envelope with rigid fingers, pulling out the folded letter inside. The handwriting was unmistakably hers, looping and precise. March 10, 2016. Ethan, I don't know if you'll even read this, but I have to try. I need you to know that I'm carrying your children. Twins. I never wanted anything from you. Never your money. Never your influence. But they deserve to know their father. They deserve to have you in their lives. I've tried reaching you. I've left messages at your office, sent emails. Your secretary said you weren't interested, that you wanted to move on. So I'm moving on too. But someday, Ethan, they'll come looking for you, and I hope when they do, you have something better to say than silence. Hannah. Ethan felt the words punch the air from his lungs. He didn't remember this letter. He didn't remember any of this. His father's voice echoed in his memory, a decade-old conversation, resurfacing with chilling clarity. You don't need distractions, son. Keep your focus. Relationships are fleeting. The company, your legacy, that's what matters. We took care of things for you, Ethan. You're better off without her. Realization clawed at his chest. His father, his mother, they had always been meticulous, controlling. He had trusted them. And now, staring into the identical green eyes of two little girls who had spent 8 years thinking he had abandoned them, he felt something he had never experienced before. Guilt. He swallowed hard, his throat suddenly dry. He set the letter down carefully, as if the weight of the words might crush him. Hannah, he started, voice hoarse. I didn't get this. Her expression remained unreadable. Didn't get it, or didn't want to. Ethan's jaw clenched. 8 years. 8 years. He had lost 8 years with them. He didn't know their favorite colors, their birthdays, whether they liked their pancakes with syrup or just butter. He didn't know the sound of their laughter, the way they fought over small things, the way they comforted each other in the dark. He didn't know them. The worst part, they didn't know him either. Sophie and Claire stared at him in expectant silence, waiting for him to say something. Anything. For the first time in his life, Ethan Harrington had nothing to say. And for the first time in his life, he was terrified. Shattered reflections. The city skyline blurred outside the tinted windows of Ethan Harrington's private car. His driver maneuvered through Manhattan's streets with smooth precision, but Ethan barely noticed. The letter Hannah had given him sat on the leather seat beside him, the paper slightly crumpled from how tightly he'd been gripping it. 8 years. 8 years stolen. His thoughts tangled like wires, looping back to the same questions. How? Why? His parents had orchestrated everything, cutting Hannah out of his life, intercepting her letters, making sure he never even knew his daughters existed. The realization settled over him like a suffocating weight. A father. He was a father. He clenched his jaw, staring at his reflection in the window. His own face, sharp, composed, unreadable, stared back at him. But behind the practiced control, something stirred. A hollowness. A crack in the foundation of everything he thought he knew. The car slowed as they approached his penthouse. The doorman, dressed in a crisp black suit, nodded and pulled the glass door open as Ethan stepped inside. The air inside was cool, silent, untouched, just as he had left it. Too silent, too untouched. For the first time, his home felt like what it truly was. A beautifully furnished cage. A mother's pain. Hannah Carter sat on the edge of her small apartment's worn-out sofa, staring at the half-empty cup of tea on the coffee table. Sophie and Claire had gone to bed an hour ago, but she could still hear them whispering in the room they shared. She exhaled slowly, rubbing her temples. Seeing Ethan tonight had been harder than she expected. Not because of who he was now, but because of what he hadn't been, not when she had needed him most. She had been young, naive, hopeful. When she found out she was pregnant, she had been terrified. But deep down, she had believed Ethan would step up. He had always been so sure of himself, always so determined. But instead, every call had gone unanswered. Every letter had been returned. She had knocked on every door leading to him, and all of them had been slammed in her face. And then one day, she simply stopped trying. For years, she had held on to anger, to resentment. But when she saw his face tonight, saw the shock, the confusion, the dawning horror, she had felt something unexpected. Pity. He hadn't known. He had believed she left him, that she had disappeared. And now he was standing at the edge of a cliff, staring down into the chasm of everything he had lost. Unanswered questions. Ethan sat at his desk, flipping through files on his tablet, but none of the words registered. His mind kept replaying the last few hours. The letter, the accusation in Hannah's voice, the identical eyes of the two little girls who had called him their father. A father. God, what did that even mean? He picked up his phone, his grip tightening around it as he hesitated. He had one call to make. Only one person could give him answers. He pressed the name. The phone rang once, twice. Then, Ethan. His mother's voice was as composed as ever, a woman who had spent her life ensuring nothing could ruffle her perfectly curated world. When were you going to tell me? Ethan asked, his voice controlled, but sharp as steel. There was a pause. Then, I don't know what you're talking about. The lie was so smooth, so practiced, that for a second, he almost questioned himself. But then he remembered the letter. The records. The 8 years stolen. Hannah, he said. The twins. My daughters. Silence. Then his mother sighed. A soft, elegant sound, as if this conversation was an inconvenience. I did what was necessary, Ethan. You were on the verge of building something monumental. A child. Children would have been a distraction. His pulse pounded. You took them from me. No, she corrected smoothly. We protected you from making a mistake. A mistake. His daughters had been a mistake. Something inside him cracked. I never got her letters, he said, gripping the phone so tightly his knuckles turned white. You made sure of that. You were focused on your future, she said, still calm. You still are. We didn't tell you because we knew you would have reacted emotionally. And emotions, well, they cloud judgment, don't they? Ethan swallowed the fury rising in his throat. They're my children. They were her children, she corrected. She made that choice when she refused our offer. Cold spread through his veins. You tried to buy her off. We gave her options, his mother said. She refused. Ethan's jaw clenched. His mother had always had a way of making even the cruelest actions sound reasonable, but there was nothing reasonable about what she had done. She had my daughters, he said, voice low. And you made sure I never knew. They don't need you now, his mother said. And you don't need them. Ethan's entire body went rigid. He had spent his whole life believing his parents had his best interests at heart, that they had guided him, shaped him, protected him. Now he saw the truth. They had shaped him into them. And suddenly, Ethan knew he didn't want that anymore. He exhaled slowly, the finality of his decision settling into his bones. Stay out of my life, he said, his voice quiet, deadly. And stay out of theirs. Then he hung up. Reaching out. The next morning, Ethan stood outside Hannah's apartment, his heartbeat hammering in his chest. He had never been nervous before, not in business, not in negotiations worth billions. But now, he was terrified. Would she even let him in? Would she let him see them? Would they even want to? The apartment door opened, and Hannah stood there, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. What are you doing here? I need to see them, Ethan said simply. Please. Hannah studied him for a long moment, her blue eyes piercing. Then, without a word, she stepped aside. Ethan entered, his breath catching as he took in the home. The small, lived-in space, the drawings on the fridge, the stuffed animals in the corner. And then he saw them. Sophie and Claire sat at the kitchen table, their small hands wrapped around cups of hot cocoa. They looked up at him, their faces carefully blank. Ethan took a step forward, his throat tight. "Hi." Silence. Then Claire, quiet, watchful, tilted her head. "Why are you here?" The simplest question, the hardest to answer. Ethan exhaled, meeting their identical green eyes. "Because," he said, voice rough, "I should have been here a long time ago." Another silence stretched between them. Then Sophie, the braver of the two, said, "We don't even know you." Ethan swallowed hard. "I know." He took a deep breath. "But I'd like to change that." Claire studied him, her fingers tightening around her cup. "Mom says trust has to be earned." Ethan nodded. "She's right." Sophie squinted at him. "How do we know you won't just disappear again?" It was a fair question, and he had no easy answer. So he told the truth. "I can't change the past," he admitted, "but I can be here now. And I can be here tomorrow. And the day after that. No matter how long it takes, I'll be here." They exchanged a look, one of those silent conversations only twins could have. Then Sophie set down her cup. "Well," she said, "we like pancakes." Ethan blinked. "Pancakes." Claire nodded. "Mom makes them every Saturday." Ethan hesitated. "I don't know how to make pancakes." Sophie smirked. "Then you better learn." Ethan let out a breathless laugh. And just like that, the first brick of something new, something real, was laid. The cost of lost time. The smell of coffee lingered in the air as Ethan Harrington sat at the kitchen table in Hannah Carter's small but cozy apartment. Across from him, Sophie and Claire sat side by side, their expressions mirroring each other's wary curiosity. A single light fixture above cast a warm glow over the wooden table, highlighting the scratches and faded spots, a stark contrast to the sleek, polished marble surfaces he was used to. For the first time in years, Ethan felt out of place, and for the first time in years, he didn't hate that feeling. "So," Ethan began, adjusting his cuffs. "Pancakes." Claire nodded, her small fingers wrapping around her cocoa mug. "Yeah." Sophie arched an eyebrow. "You said you don't know how to make them." Ethan exhaled. "I don't." A pause. Then Claire asked, "So how are you going to fix that?" That question hit differently than she probably intended. How was he going to fix any of this? "I'll learn," he said, his voice firmer than he expected. Sophie crossed her arms, her little face too serious for an 8-year-old. "What else do you need to learn?" Ethan hesitated. "A lot." A long silence stretched between them, broken only by the faint hum of the fridge and the occasional clink of Hannah washing dishes in the sink. Claire tilted her head. "Like what?" Ethan folded his hands on the table. "Like what your favorite subjects are, what books you like to read, if you like sports or music or painting." His voice softened. "What makes you happy?" Both girls exchanged a glance, one of those silent twin conversations Ethan was starting to notice. Finally, Sophie leaned forward. "You don't know anything about us." It wasn't a question. It was a statement. One that carried weight. One that made his chest tighten. Ethan nodded, accepting the truth. "Not yet." Sophie studied him like she was dissecting a business proposal. "So, why are you here?" "Because I want to know you," he said simply. "And because I should have been here from the start." Another silence. Then Claire mumbled, "You can try." Ethan's breath caught. It wasn't a declaration of trust. It wasn't even forgiveness. But it was something. The empire that didn't matter anymore. Ethan's penthouse was silent when he returned. The city lights sprawled beneath him through floor-to-ceiling windows, glittering like artificial stars. Normally, this view filled him with satisfaction, the tangible proof of his success. Tonight, it felt empty. He loosened his tie and poured himself a drink, staring at the reflection of the man in the glass. 8 years ago, If someone had told him that he had children out there, he would have dismissed it as ridiculous. Now it was the only thing that mattered. His phone buzzed. A message from his assistant. Meeting tomorrow with the Astor Group. 9 a.m. sharp. Confirm. Ethan stared at the screen. A billion-dollar deal. A contract that would shape the city skyline for the next decade. He typed a response. Reschedule. Something more important came up. For the first time in his career, Ethan Harrington had something more important than work. A family's fragments. The next weekend, Ethan stood outside Hannah's apartment again, a bag of groceries in one hand. Pancake ingredients. Because if he was going to do this, he was going to do it right. Hannah opened the door, her eyes narrowing slightly. You're persistent. I told them I'd learn, Ethan said simply. Hannah studied him for a moment, then sighed and stepped aside. Fine, but if you burn my kitchen down, you're paying for renovations. Ethan smirked. Noted. Sophie and Claire were already at the table, watching with identical expressions of skepticism. You actually showed up? Sophie asked. Ethan set the bag down. You sound surprised. We figured you'd change your mind, Claire admitted, poking at the flour bag. Ethan's chest tightened. I won't. Hannah handed him an apron with a smirk. Good luck. He quickly realized pancakes were harder than they looked. The first one came out resembling a charcoal hockey puck. The second was slightly better, though Claire pointed out it still looked kind of sad. By the third, something clicked. And by the fourth, the girls were laughing. Not polite laughs, not forced conversation. Real laughter, and Ethan felt something deep inside him shift. This wasn't just breakfast. This was time. Time he could never get back, but time he could start making now. A ghost from the past. Just when he thought he might be making progress, the past came knocking. Literally. A week after their breakfast tradition began, Ethan was in Hannah's apartment again when a knock at the door made her freeze. She glanced at Ethan, something wary flashing in her eyes, before moving to answer it. The moment she opened the door, she tensed. Ethan couldn't see the visitor at first, but when the person spoke, he knew that voice. Well, the voice drawled. This is unexpected. Andrew Harrington, Ethan's younger brother, the golden child, the one who had always been the better Harrington in their parents' eyes, the one groomed for legacy, and the one standing in Hannah's doorway, smirking like he owned the place. Andrew, Ethan said coolly. Andrew's gaze flickered to him, then to Sophie and Claire, who were peeking around the corner. Then back to Hannah. So, Andrew said, tilting his head, is this what you've been hiding? Hannah's expression hardened. What are you doing here? Andrew ignored her, stepping into the apartment like he longed. His expensive suit was crisp, his shoes polished, but there was something too polished about him, like he was still playing a role. I came to talk to you, he said to Ethan, glancing around the small apartment with mild distaste. But now I'm glad I did. I see you've been distracted. Ethan's jaw tightened. Get to the point. Andrew's smirk didn't falter. Our parents know where you've been spending your time. Ethan exhaled sharply. Of course they did. They want you to stop, Andrew continued. Come back to what really matters. Ethan clenched his fists. This is what matters. Andrew sighed, shaking his head. This isn't your world, Ethan. You're not a family man. You're a Harrington. And Harringtons don't. Don't what? Ethan cut in, his voice sharp. Don't take responsibility. Don't fight for what's important. Don't love. Andrew scoffed. They don't get distracted by emotions. Ethan took a step closer, his voice low. That's why I'm nothing like them. And that's why you can leave. Andrew's smirk finally faltered. For the first time, something flickered in his eyes. Understanding. Maybe even fear. Because Ethan wasn't just walking away from the Harringtons. He was walking toward something better. And that terrified them. Andrew exhaled slowly, rolling his shoulders back. All right. He nodded once, like he had seen enough. Just remember, Ethan, when they cut you off, don't come running back. With that, he turned and walked out. The door clicked shut behind him. Silence stretched through the apartment. Then Sophie spoke. I don't like him. Ethan let out a breathless chuckle, rubbing his face. Me neither. Hannah exhaled, shaking her head. Your parents are never going to let this go. I know, Ethan said. And I don't care. Because for the first time in his life, Ethan Harrington wasn't just fighting for money, power, or legacy. He was fighting for family. And he wasn't going to lose this time. Blood and betrayal. The soft ticking of the grandfather clock in Ethan Harrington's penthouse was the only sound in the room. He stood near the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, gazing out over the Manhattan skyline. The city stretched before him, a monument to power and control, the very things that had defined his life. Tonight, though, they felt meaningless. The visit from his brother Andrew still lingered in his mind like a bad aftertaste. His parents had sent a warning, veiled in a smooth, practiced smile. When they cut you off, don't come running back. Ethan scoffed under his breath. They thought they could still control him. That their wealth, their influence, their carefully constructed web of lies would be enough to keep him tethered. But they had already lost. He wasn't their pawn anymore. He turned away from the window and reached for his phone. His fingers hovered over Hannah's number. He hadn't told her about the visit. He wasn't sure if he should. Would she worry? Would she tell him to walk away? Would she think he wasn't strong enough to fight for them? His thoughts were interrupted by a sudden, sharp knock at the door. Ethan frowned. It was late. No one ever came to his penthouse unannounced. He crossed the polished marble floor and opened the door. His father stood there, a father's deception. Richard Harrington was a man who had built empires, crushed competitors, and turned even the most impossible deals in his favor. His silver hair was neatly combed back, his tailored suit pressed to perfection. His presence alone carried the weight of his legacy, as if he expected the world to bend to his will. Ethan met his father's icy stare without flinching. Surprised to see me? Richard asked, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. No, Ethan said flatly. He closed the door, resisting the urge to slam it. His father took in the penthouse with a calculated glance before turning back to him. I heard you've been making some interesting choices. Ethan folded his arms. You mean the choices you tried to take away from me? Richard sighed, shaking his head. You don't see it yet, but you're throwing your life away. Ethan laughed under his breath. My life, or the version of my life you planned for me. His father's expression didn't change, but Ethan could see the tightening of his jaw. The Harrington name is built on power, Richard said. On discipline. You know that. You were raised to understand it. What you're doing, wasting time with people who don't belong in this world, is a mistake. Ethan's patience snapped. People? You mean my daughters? His voice was sharp, cutting through the air like a knife. Richard's gaze didn't waver. They're not part of this family. Ethan took a slow, deliberate step forward. That's where you're wrong. His father exhaled, as if speaking to a stubborn child. You're making this personal when it's not. Ethan's fists clenched. It's always been personal. You stole my children from me. You erased them from my life like they were a mistake. Like they didn't matter. They didn't, Richard said coldly. Ethan's vision went red. His hands curled into fists at his sides. For most of his life, he had obeyed his father, had followed the path laid out for him, played by the rules written in blood and money. Not anymore. I'm done with you, Ethan said, his voice low and deadly. Stay away from me. Stay away from them. Richard studied him for a long moment. Then, to Ethan's surprise, his father smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the kind of smile a man gave when he already had his next move planned. You really think this is over? Richard said softly. Ethan's gut twisted. His father turned and walked to the door. Before leaving, he paused. You're making a dangerous choice, son, and dangerous choices have consequences. Then he was gone. A silence he left behind was suffocating. Ethan didn't need to guess what he meant. His father wasn't just going to walk away. The threat becomes real. Hannah's apartment was small, but it was theirs. A home filled with warmth and memories, unlike the cold, pristine spaces Ethan had lived in all his life. When he arrived the next morning, he could tell something was wrong the moment Hannah opened the door. Her blue eyes were sharp, tense. "Did you tell your father where we live?" Ethan's stomach dropped. "No." "Why?" She stepped aside. Inside, the apartment looked normal, except for the crisp white envelope sitting on the kitchen table. Ethan picked it up. There was no name, no return address. Inside was a single note, written in his father's precise handwriting. "This ends now. Walk away before it's too late." Ethan's hands curled around the paper, his pulse roaring in his ears. "Claire found it slipped under the door this morning," Hannah said, crossing her arms. "What does it mean?" "It means my father isn't done." Hannah exhaled, rubbing her temples. "I knew this was going to happen. Your family doesn't just let go of control." Ethan set the note down, his jaw tight. "They think I'll back down." Hannah met his gaze. "Will you?" Ethan didn't hesitate. "No." For the first time in his life, Ethan wasn't chasing power. He wasn't making a deal or closing a contract. He was fighting for something real. And he wasn't going to lose. A father's vow. That night, Ethan sat on the floor of Sophie and Claire's shared bedroom. They were curled up in their beds, but neither of them were asleep. Claire spoke first. "Are we in trouble?" Ethan looked at her, confused. "What?" She fiddled with the edge of her blanket. "Mom looks worried. You look angry. Something's wrong." Sophie sat up. "Are you going to leave?" The question hit Ethan like a punch to the gut. He moved closer, sitting beside Sophie's bed. "I will never leave," he said firmly. Sophie bit her lip. "But they don't want you to be here. They don't get to decide that." Claire hesitated. "But what if they make you go away?" Ethan's throat tightened. He had spent years making decisions based on what was logical, what was profitable. But nothing in his life had ever mattered more than this. He reached out, gently brushing a loose strand of hair from Claire's face. "No one can make me leave you." The girls exchanged a glance. Then Sophie mumbled, "You better not burn the pancakes next time." Ethan chuckled. "No promises." Claire curled under her blankets, her voice sleepy. "Good night, Dad." Dad. The word hit him differently than before. This time, it wasn't just a label. It was a vow. One he wouldn't break. No matter what his father did. No matter how much the past tried to take them away. This was his family, and he was going to fight for them. A battle for blood. The rhythmic hum of Manhattan traffic filled the silence in Ethan Harrington's penthouse. The city lights twinkled like artificial stars beyond the glass, stretching endlessly, a kingdom he had once ruled without question. But tonight, Ethan felt like an emperor standing at the edge of a ruined throne. His father's threat echoed in his mind. This ends now. Ethan had spent his life obeying, playing the role of the perfect son, the ruthless businessman, the heir to a billion-dollar empire built on control. But now, he had something worth more than wealth, and his father wanted to take it away. His daughters, his family. Ethan clenched his jaw and dialed a number on his phone. It rang twice before the smooth voice of his private investigator, Marcus Hale, came through. "Sir," Ethan didn't waste time. "I need everything you can dig up on my father. Every hidden account, every offshore investment, every legal gray area he's ever operated in." Marcus hesitated. "That's a dangerous move, Ethan." "I know." His grip tightened around the phone. "Do it anyway." Because if Richard Harrington wanted a war, he was about to get one. A mother's resolve. Hannah Carter sat in the dim glow of her apartment's kitchen, staring at the envelope Ethan had left on the table earlier. Inside, neatly organized, were bank statements, property records, trust funds in Sophie and Claire's names, a financial security she had never dared to dream of. But also a promise. Not just money, not just another attempt to fix things with wealth. This time, it was Ethan stepping up. He wasn't trying to buy his daughters. He was protecting them. Yet, doubt still crept in. Could she trust him? Could she trust that he wouldn't disappear when things got difficult? Hannah rubbed her temples, exhaling slowly. Then, a knock at the door startled her. She opened it to find Andrew Harrington leaning against the doorframe, his expression smooth as glass. Hannah stiffened. "Miss Carter," he said, flashing his signature smirk. "May I come in?" "No," she said flatly. Andrew chuckled. "Fair enough. Then I'll keep this brief." His eyes gleamed with something dark. "Walk away from Ethan. Take the money. Take the girls. Disappear." Hannah's blood ran cold. Andrew tilted his head. "Trust me, it's the best offer you'll get." Her fingers curled into fists. "Is that a threat?" Andrew sighed dramatically. "A suggestion. Ethan's making enemies, and we both know what happens when my father gets tired of waiting." Hannah's stomach twisted. She knew exactly what Richard Harrington was capable of, and that terrified her. A meeting with the devil. The next morning, Ethan stood outside the Harrington Global Headquarters, a glass fortress towering over the city. He had spent years walking through these doors as their heir, their future, their legacy. Today, he walked in as their enemy. He strode through the lobby, past the polished floors and whispering employees, stepping into the private elevator that led to his father's top-floor office. When the doors opened, Richard Harrington was waiting. His father stood behind his desk, a single glass of whiskey in his hand, watching as Ethan entered. "You've been busy," Richard said, swirling the amber liquid. "Digging where you shouldn't be." Ethan shut the door behind him. "And you've been hiding things you shouldn't be." A slow smirk tugged at Richard's lips. "You think you can beat me?" Ethan stepped forward, placing a thick folder on the desk. "I don't have to beat you. I just have to expose you." Richard's eyes flickered toward the folder, but his expression didn't waver. "Fraud," Ethan continued. "Tax evasion, hidden real estate deals under shell companies, offshore accounts funneling money into political campaigns. I wonder what the SEC would say about that." Richard exhaled slowly. "You would destroy everything your family built." "You destroyed my family first." His father took a slow sip of whiskey, then placed the glass down with deliberate precision. Then, to Ethan's disgust, he laughed. "Oh, Ethan," Richard mused, "you think I didn't plan for this? You think I didn't see it coming?" Ethan felt a shift in the air. Something wasn't right. Richard straightened. "Did you really think I'd let you take them from me?" Ethan's stomach dropped. "What did you do?" he asked, his voice sharp. His father's smile widened. "Right now," he said smoothly, "Hannah's getting a visit from Child Protective Services. You see, someone tipped them off about an unfit mother, about a woman struggling to provide for her daughters, and given that she has no legal custody arrangement with you." Richard's gaze turned cold. "They can take them away." Ethan's world stopped. His pulse roared in his ears. "You son of a—" He barely resisted the urge to lunge at his father. Richard leaned back, utterly unfazed. "You wanted war, son," he murmured. "Now you have it." Ethan turned on his heel, storming toward the door. His father's parting words followed him like a knife to the spine. "Let's see how long you last without me." A race against time. Ethan didn't stop moving. His car tore through the city streets, his pulse pounding. By the time he reached Hannah's apartment, there were already 2 CPS agents inside. Hannah stood by the kitchen, her arms wrapped protectively around Sophie and Claire. Her face was furious. Sophie looked terrified. Claire was clutching her sister's hand so tightly her knuckles were white. Ethan shoved through the door. "This is a mistake," he said, his voice dangerously low. One of the CPS agents turned, looking him over. "And you are?" "Their father," Ethan growled. "And I guarantee you, whoever sent you here is a liar." The agent glanced at his paperwork. "It says here that you have no legal rights to them." Ethan's stomach twisted. Richard had planned for this. He wasn't just trying to scare them. He was trying to take them away. Hannah's voice was sharp. "This is absurd. I've raised them alone their whole lives. I have a stable job, a home. But no legal custody," the agent cut in. "And given that there's been an anonymous report." "Anonymous," Ethan barked. "Right, because anonymous accusations always hold up in court." The agent sighed. "We're just following protocol." Sophie pressed her face into Hannah's side. Claire was shaking. Ethan felt something inside him snap. He turned to Hannah. "Marry me." Silence. Hannah blinked. "What?" Ethan didn't hesitate. "Marry me," he repeated. "Make it legal. Make me their father in every way that matters." The CPS agent frowned. "That's not." Ethan cut him off. "Would a stable two-parent household be enough proof?" Hannah stared at him. For the first time since meeting Ethan again, she saw it. He wasn't running. He wasn't looking for a way out. He was looking for a way to stay. Sophie sniffled. "Mom." Hannah took a slow breath. Then she met Ethan's gaze and nodded. The war for family. The moment the words left Ethan Harrington's mouth, "Marry me," the world seemed to freeze. Hannah Carter stared at him, her grip on Sophie and Claire tightening. Her daughters, their daughters, clung to her, their wide, fearful eyes darting between their mother and the CPS agents standing awkwardly in her small apartment. Ethan had always been a man of control, of precision, of carefully calculated risks. This wasn't one of them. This was desperation. Not to save his wealth, not to win against his father, to save his family. And Hannah knew it. She swallowed hard, eyes flickering to Sophie and Claire. The girls trusted her. The thought of them being ripped away, thrown into the system, judged by people who didn't know them, just because Ethan's family was playing dirty, was unbearable. "Mom," Sophie whispered, voice trembling. Hannah inhaled sharply, then looked at Ethan. He was serious, dead serious, and suddenly she wasn't staring at the billionaire real estate mogul anymore. She was staring at the father of her children, the man who had been robbed of them, and the man who was willing to fight for them now. Her heart slammed against her ribs. The CPS agents were shifting uncomfortably. They were waiting. So was Ethan. Finally, Hannah nodded. "Okay," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We do this." Ethan's chest loosened, relief flooding through him. Then Hannah turned to the CPS agents, her spine steel straight. "You can tell whoever sent you," she said coldly, "that they just lost. The battle begins." The next morning, Ethan and Hannah sat across from a family lawyer in a sleek office downtown. Ethan didn't go to his lawyers. He didn't want anyone connected to his father's web of influence. Instead, he had Marcus Hale, his investigator, find the best independent family law attorney in the city. And now, they had a plan. "You'll need to establish full custody immediately," the lawyer, Mrs. Cohen, said, flipping through the paperwork. "This won't be easy. The courts don't just take biological fathers at their word after years of absence." Ethan's jaw clenched. "I didn't have a choice." Mrs. Cohen looked at him, her sharp eyes narrowing. "The courts won't care. They'll look at Hannah as the sole provider and consider your sudden involvement suspicious." Ethan's stomach twisted. He expected this. His father had set the perfect trap. A legal minefield designed to make him look like a reckless, selfish billionaire trying to claim children he had ignored. "Which is why the marriage will help," Mrs. Cohen continued, glancing at Hannah. "A legally recognized, two-parent household would provide stability in the court's eyes. And if we move fast, we can establish Ethan's paternal rights before your in-laws try something worse. Hannah exhaled slowly. How fast? The lawyer adjusted her glasses. 2 weeks. Hannah stiffened. That's not enough time for. We don't have time, Ethan interjected. Hannah snapped her gaze to him, and for a moment, he saw it. The hesitation, the fear. But then she looked at her daughters and nodded. Okay. The Harringtons strike back. The moment news of Ethan and Hannah's engagement leaked, the world exploded. The business world, the media, and worst of all, his family. The headline was everywhere. Ethan Harrington engaged to former lover, the twins he never knew he had. His father's voice came 2 hours after the article broke. It was cold. You're making a mistake. Ethan leaned back in his chair, staring out the window. No, you did. Richard Harrington sighed. I don't know what you're trying to prove, but this desperation, it's beneath you. Ethan's grip on the phone tightened. This isn't about proving anything, he said quietly. It's about fixing what you broke. A pause. Then his father's voice turned sharp. Do you really think some paper marriage will stop me? Ethan smirked. You're afraid. Richard laughed, but there was tension behind it. Afraid? Of what? Ethan's voice dropped to a deadly whisper. Of losing. His father silenced, told him everything. Then Richard sighed again. You always were stubborn. Ethan smiled grimly. And you always underestimated me. Then he hung up. A wedding without a choice. The wedding was small. No extravagant ballroom. No press invites. Just a courthouse. Hannah wore a simple white dress. Sophie and Claire held her hands. Ethan stood beside her, his suit pressed but not perfect. He barely slept. The officiant read the vows. Ethan wasn't listening. He was watching. Watching Hannah. Watching his daughters. And when the officiant finally asked him, Do you take this woman as your wife? He said the truest words he had ever spoken. I do. Hannah hesitated, her lips parting slightly, as if she had expected something different. Then she whispered, I do. They signed the papers. And just like that, they were a family. The courtroom battle. 1 week later, Ethan and Hannah stood in family court, facing his parents. Richard Harrington sat behind his team of high-powered lawyers, watching, waiting, for them to lose. Ethan squared his shoulders. Not today. The judge glanced at the paperwork. Mr. Harrington, your request is for full legal custody, alongside Miss Carter. Yes, Your Honor, Ethan said firmly. Richard's lawyer stood. Your Honor, we have evidence that this marriage is nothing but a last-minute attempt to manipulate the system. Ethan didn't let them finish. He stood. My father, he said, turning to the judge, has done everything in his power to erase my children from my life. He made sure I never knew they existed. He intercepted letters, phone calls, and falsified records. The courtroom murmured. The judge's eyes narrowed. Do you have proof? Ethan placed a thick folder on the table. Phone logs, bank transfers, letters that were returned before they ever reached me. The judge flipped through the pages, and Richard Harrington. For the first time, he looked nervous. The judge exhaled. Miss Carter, do you believe Mr. Harrington is a fit parent? Hannah turned to Ethan. For the first time, she wasn't looking at the businessman. She was looking at the man who had shown up, who had fought for them, who had never given up. Yes, she said softly. I do. The judge nodded, then turned to Richard Harrington. Your claims are denied. Custody is awarded to both parents. Richard's face twisted in fury. Ethan smiled. For the first time, his father had lost, and Ethan had won everything that mattered. A new beginning. That night, Ethan sat with Sophie and Claire on the couch, watching cartoons. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about board meetings, or stock prices, or legacy. Sophie leaned against his arm. Claire curled up beside him. And Hannah, she stood in the doorway, watching. Then, softly, she whispered, "You really did it." Ethan turned to her. "We did." And for the first time in his life, he knew exactly where he belonged.